Track and prevent subcontractor risk with presenter Rob Meal. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone will be in listen-only mode, so if you have questions, please type them into the questions box on the screen, and we will address them at the end of the session. If you need to step away, please do not put your phone on hold. If you have hold music, it will play for all the attendees. This webinar will be recorded, and we will email out a copy to everyone within a few days. I will now turn it over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Krista. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Track and Prevent Subcontractor Risk in our Lunch and Learn series. Today we're going to go through a number of things, and we'll go through some screenshots as well. We're going to go to, let me get to my PowerPoint here. So we're first going to talk about, give a compliance overview, talk about settings that will be new in AP and vendor setup, settings that will be new in job and commitment, changes in the data structure, and then other changes that you may notice in the system. So the first thing we want to talk about is in the compliance overview is insurances. And when we get into the vendor setup screen, you'll see that in addition to the 4 insurances that you were able to track previously, if you're still running version 9.8, there are now 2 additional insurances that you can track. Also, there's different requirements that you can check off to make it fairly restrictive as far as whether you're able to pay a vendor whose insurance is not in compliance or not. The way lien waivers are tracked has changed a little bit as well, so we'll run through that. There's an option now to track certified reports if you're doing any prevailing wage jobs and are required to provide your subs certified reports to the owners. And then you also have the ability to set up miscellaneous items, items that you want yourself to be able to use for compliance. And that's just your company's requirements. So first we'll talk about the changes in the accounts payable settings. So now, once you load either version 12.1 or 13, there will now be an additional tab. I'll jump into my desktop and go into the accounts payable module and come up to my file and AP settings. And now the new tab in version 12 and 13 is on the lower right-hand side here called Compliance Settings. So we click on our Compliance Settings, and here's where we can control whether I'm doing partial liens, final liens, whether I want to create them or not create them, when I want the partial lien created. So in this instance, it's when the invoice is being posted, or when the payment date, when it's selected for payment, or when it's actually been paid. I can choose my through date of the month of the invoice or the invoice date. And if I select when to create it, now I can select that the payment date will be the through date. Again, when I switch between invoice posting and invoice payment, it switches the final lien waiver to cover. So if it's on invoice payment, it's going to be the payment amount. If it's on the invoice, it's going to be on the invoice amount. And down here are our pre-built lien waiver formats. These have to be crystal reports. If you have written them and you want the default to be a customized report, it will have to be done in crystal. Down the bottom, this little checkbox here, as far as enable lien waivers for all vendors based on job compliance settings. Now, what this means, over when we get into the job setup, there's going to be an additional tab as well for compliance. And if we select the checkbox here, if a vendor is to receive a lien waiver or not, I guess I shouldn't have clicked that. That's better. If the vendor is to receive a lien waiver or not, is dictated by their vendor type and how the job is set up. If you want to determine whether a vendor is to get a lien waiver or not, it's based on the vendor. You don't check that box, and then only vendors that have the checkbox in the vendor settings will receive the lien waivers. So again, this will dictate based on job setup. If I don't check that, it will be dictated by the vendor setup. Down the bottom here, if we are doing compliance checks for certified reports, we tell it what date we want the check to take place, either the system date or the invoice date. So we have all of these same options for both conditional and unconditional lien waivers. Different formats because the verbiage on the forms themselves are different. Now we come up here to our compliance warning settings. So the items that we talked about before as far as lien waivers, certified reports, insurances, and miscellaneous, these can all have different warning settings. So in this instance, if there's an outstanding lien waiver, we want to get warned when we're going in to do invoice entry. If there's an outstanding lien waiver, we can also be warned when invoice is selected for payment. Or if the vendor is not in compliance, we can actually block the payment of the invoice. So these three options exist on all three of these tabs: the lien waiver, certified, insurances, and then miscellaneous. So you can choose how restrictive you want to be with paying your vendors based on these settings in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and go ahead and hit OK. Not sure why my screen is hung up here. Not recommended that you do that. We go in first and we select our restrictions that we want to put on the vendors for lien waivers, insurances, etc. And now on each individual vendor, there's going to be an additional tab for compliance items. So as we scroll out here to the right, here I have insurance and compliance. When I click on that, this is now where I will see the additional two insurances. So we go ahead and we click on insurance certificates. So down here you have two additional insurances that you can track. Now the additional checkboxes on the insurances are that we've always had the proof required, but if I need insurance for every commitment that I set up for individual vendors, I would click this box right here. Okay. Now what the override button is for would be is if I have it restricted that if a vendor is not in compliance and I get a warning and it blocks the payment, if this box, and I really want the vendor to get paid, I can come in here, check that box, and it will override the block. So you can kind of pick and choose on different invoices whether you want to enforce the blocking of the invoice being paid, or if you want to override the restrictive rules that you've put in place. Okay. But this is, your normal insurance information that was there. So we can, again, it's by insurance type. Some are required per commitment. Some might not be, but we can take a peek at that on a contract by contract or commitment by commitment basis. Go ahead and hit OK here. Now, these are where we can set up miscellaneous compliance items that are in the system. So in here, I can come over here and select from a drop-down list as far as do I want a W-9 to be part of my miscellaneous compliances. Is this required for final compliance? So meaning that if this isn't checked, it won't release the last check for that vendor. So I can go through and make sure that all the things that I want checked are checked off. So we would put in our date received, date required. Is it required on jobs? Is it required for final compliance? If I have actual license numbers, if they might be licenses, things like that. I would again have my effective dates, my date of expiration, the date it was received, who it received by, and again, do I want to be able to override this if the vendor is not in compliance when I go to pay the invoice. So if I click on Receive Selected, I can select more than one thing at a time. So here I would use Windows functionality if I have a packet for new vendors that I put out there that I need required before I start paying them. I can highlight by holding the Control key down multiple items at the same time, and then I can just click Receive Selected, and it automatically marks them off as received. Now, if I choose not to check off on that global control that the vendor type controls which vendors are to receive the lien waivers based on their vendor type, I can click on individual vendors who might be the same vendor type as others, but I don't want all of those vendor types to get lien waivers. So this is where I would be able to set up individual companies to receive lien waivers that are the same vendor type as some others. So with that checked, this vendor, if their vendor type's checked on the job, they would receive a lien waiver. But somebody else who might also be a subcontractor, if this isn't checked, they would not receive a lien waiver. If we wanted to apply across the board, that's when we use the checkbox in the compliance settings under AP settings. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Save here. Now we want to go ahead and hit Close. Now what we're going to see in our job setup change is if I come out here under job cost, and on each job now, there's going to be an additional tab called Job Compliance. So back over in AP, on our vendor setup, we have our vendor types, our four main vendor types, and we also then, in job cost, have across the columns those same job types, or vendor types. So now, when I click one of these boxes, I can tell the system what's the minimum amount to create a lien waiver. Do I want to use a minimum commitment amount, and what that is? So on any job, I might not need lien waivers if the commitment is under $5,000. So I can control that as well. So I would see all of my vendor types up here. On the different vendor types are certified reports required. So I would be able to come through here and check off which vendors I want to provide certified reports to me. Then I can also come down here, and one of the drop-downs over in the vendor setup is jurisdiction. So if I need different jurisdictions to be tracked for licensing, those types of things, then I would have a jurisdiction in here, and if they're not in compliant with that jurisdiction, this would be a non-compliant job. So if I do come through here and I check off that I require final completion approval, and down here I have my final compliance percentage, so it is going to hold 10% of subcontractor invoices automatically until, and it won't let me release that when we get into the commitment setup. You'll see what happens. But now I have to tell the system what day of week ending for my certified reports and my through date settings. So this can change, again, per job, what the through date needs to be for my lien waivers. So I can control that, again, per job. So now, after my jobs are set up with the appropriate check boxes, now let's talk about, kind of straight away from my PowerPoint. So we've been through the vendor setup, the job setup for lien waivers, certified reports, and compliance percentage. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the commitment setup, where when you're setting up the commitment, you can tell the system if it's supposed to get certified reports, insurance information, if you need to set up any secondary vendors, and if you need to do lien waivers for that particular company or that particular job. So if we jump back into job cost, now this can be done in either project management if you have it, or can also be done in job cost. So if we're going to do it in project management, we would have project management open here. Now, there are no additional tabs on the job setup in project management. That only exists in job cost. But I would come out here under my contract control and come to commitments. And what will happen is, if I go in and a vendor is marked off to have commitment-specific insurance, I would put in the vendor number, put in the description, select the vendor, and now I will get these warnings that for this vendor, my insurance is out of compliance. If I go to the details, it's going to tell me what all insurances are out of expired or have expired. I can go to what's called compliance management, which we're going to touch on in a little bit, so I'm just going to bypass that for right now. I have the option to ignore, which will just let me enter the commitment as is, or I can come out here to select a different vendor. So if I did that, it would pull up my vendor list and I can move forward. I'm going to select to ignore, and we would go through and code our commitment as we always do. Now, if I am tracking certified reports for a particular job and a particular vendor type, in order for those reports to work and let you know that the vendor is in or out of compliance, I have to put a schedule in here. I have to put an actual start date. Otherwise, the system doesn't know when to start assessing whether that vendor is in compliance or not. So even if you have that box checked to check or to track certified reports, if we don't have an actual start date in here, it will not actually track them. So that's very important to remember. Now, the other thing here in the commitments is after the commitment's completed, and if I have turned on the feature of final compliance approval, I will not be able to release the retainage on this commitment until an authorized person comes in and checks that final compliance approval box. Then I can actually do the last check for that vendor for this commitment. But prior to that, it will block you from actually cutting the retainage check. Now, the insurance screen, when I click on that, right now it comes up blank. If it's set to be that the vendor's insurance is required for the commitment, I can go and view the vendor information. I can't put any of this information, I can copy it from here, but it will not duplicate it. As you can see, it's read-only, so I should have a separate certificate of insurance for this particular commitment. And again, I have check marks here, whether it's required, whether I want to override if they're not in compliance. So I have the same options when I'm setting up a commitment as I do when I'm setting up the vendor itself. Go ahead, okay. Now, if I'm aware that my commitment is going to have secondary vendors, I could click on this box over here and make sure save your changes first. And now I can put in any secondary vendors that are part of this commitment. So I can do a lookup of my secondary vendors so that I can say whether I want to select from an existing person, company, or I can create new address books, persons or companies right from here. So I'm going to go and say I'm going to do a select from the company, and my list is going to come up from my address book, and I can pick who the secondary vendor is. So now I've linked it to. So I can unlink them if I don't think the relationship's going to last that long. I can do what the relationship is with who. Do I need to create lien waivers for the secondary vendor? Are they also required to provide certified reports? Do they need a joint check? I want the item to pre-fill, so if I have multiple cost codes or multiple items in my commitment, I can actually go through and attach secondary vendors to the specific piece of the commitment that they're going to be working on. And then they might not be getting the total 1,000. They might be getting only 250 of it. So I can go, and it'll drop in all my contact information from what I have set up in address book. So I can go ahead and accept all of this information. And now if I did have another secondary vendor that needed to be attached, I would do that here as well. I can go ahead and hit close. And now you do have an option to create or enter a pre-lien. It doesn't actually print out a lien, but I can come through and put in a pre-lien and then generate it. So if I come in here and I have a pre-lien of $500 and I click generate, so now I have pre-lien sitting out there for that commitment. And I can't actually print those liens because that actually has to be an actual lien that you're able to print. Okay. So that basically is our commitment setup and the changes that you have available there. So now there's two places. Well, you can get to the compliance management window when you're entering something. If they're not in compliance, up, and it will take you to where you're able to say that something was received or not received. So if I came out here to enter an invoice now against that vendor. I can go to tasks, enter invoices, and I can go ahead and put in our vendor ID. Now I can go right to my compliance management from here. So I would be able to click on. And now what's going to happen is I can pick a specific job for this vendor. I can, since that popped up from me entering an invoice for this vendor, it will only show jobs that this vendor's part of. And now I see my condition, my outstanding items on this particular vendor and this particular job. So if I want to see all, even things that have been received, I can go ahead and click all. And again, if I needed to say I received this one and this one, using Windows functionality, now I can just hit Receive Selected. I can export that to Excel. If I wanted to actually print these liens out, this is how I would go about doing it. And it's going to, this is going to pop up based on the default that I have set up in the AP settings. So if for some unknown reason I wanted to print out a different one for this vendor, I can browse out and grab another Crystal report to do it, but those have to be Crystal. Okay. And I have all the same options for all of the different types of compliance items that we want to look at. So I would have a screen for certified report, a screen for insurances, and then any of the miscellaneous screens. Now the miscellaneous, where we were talking about setting up different jurisdictions, this guy doesn't have, let me grab that. It should have a jurisdiction. Why he doesn't have a jurisdiction? Let me do this. Close here. I'm going to cancel the invoice. Now the other way, two other ways you can get to that compliance maintenance screen or management screen is in tasks under accounts payable or in project management under contract control. And it takes you to the same spot. Okay, so if you're set to use the last job, it will bring up the last job and all of the compliance items regardless of the vendor. If I'm not set to use last job, then I'll be picking from my job list. So you can see these can get built. I don't think there's any here, but we have insurances again and now miscellaneous. So we can go ahead and put in any of the miscellaneous items. And on this tab, I can jump back and forth between jobs and vendors. So the miscellaneous tab would be for all vendors on that job. This would be just for that job itself. Now, if I do have secondary vendors, I can come up and manage my secondary vendors here, and I can select if they already have a lien waiver. We would have a pre-fill, pick all those things, and now I would be able to select that, okay. So we already have it. This would pre-fill from, we'll say, insulation is what that's doing. So now we can go ahead. If it was required to print a lien waiver, we would be able to do that. So this is our compliance management, and basically you get to the compliance management from either AP tasks, subcontract compliance, or PJ contract control. Okay. So now, let's talk a little bit about the changes in the data. If you're still running version 9.8 or not, and you've been using the lien waivers in the system, what happens, all of those files were previously stored in the AP files, in the AP records. With converting to version 12 or 13, those files are now stored in job cost. So if you have any custom reports, they may need to be reworked. The Timberline pre-printed that were written in Report Designer, they actually go away when you do the upgrade. So if you were actually using those, you want to store them in a different area prior to doing the upgrade so that you can copy them back to the reports folder, because if you don't do that, they will go away. Also, you can write a custom lien waiver in the Timberline Report Designer still. It's just you need to know that the fields have changed from being residing in accounts payable versus now they reside in job cost. Now, if we go back into any one of our modules here, I'm just going to go back to the desktop. In order to customize the mouse disappeared. It's a good time to run for the mouse to run out of batteries, right? Fortunately, I think I have a backup mouse sitting here. Sorry about this. Do it the old-fashioned way. So I've come up here under Common Tasks. There we go. Up to Common Tasks. And in order to create your miscellaneous compliance items, I come here under Common Tasks, Company Settings, and then Custom Descriptions. Pull up the Custom Descriptions, and when we scroll down, here I have my AP jurisdiction and my AP compliance type. So these are customizable drop-downs. So again, if I have licenses that are required in different states or different areas, I can put in jurisdictions that I can choose from. And then also I have my custom list of miscellaneous compliance items that I want to track. And much like all other custom lists, I can add, delete, put them in an order, any order that I want to put them in. Okay. Go ahead and hit that OK there. Now, a couple of side notes here. If you're, some companies don't post invoices immediately. If you have a lien waiver that's already been submitted but you haven't posted the invoice yet, you have the ability to come in under change invoices and pull up the vendor. We'll still get our compliance information messages. I can pull from my list of new invoices for this vendor. And now, when I hit OK, on the bottom of the screen, I can receive the lien waiver at the same time. And that'll make an entry over in my subcontractors compliance management screen. So I can receive lien waivers there. I can also receive lien waivers when I'm entering an invoice. So I can go through, put in my invoice, fill in all the pertinent information, and if it's commitment related, I would still do all of those things. Now I get commitment specific warnings. And now it's going to pop me up, and I can say, okay, I did receive this, I did receive this, so that I can make those go away if I have actually received them. And then once I finish doing my distribution, now I have the option here, again, to receive lien waivers. And when I click on that, it's going to put in the invoice information. Is received, is this a final invoice? Or was it the final lien waiver that I received? So I go ahead and hit OK and accept my invoice. So I can do receipt of lien waivers while I'm doing invoice entry, or if I haven't posted the invoice yet, I can go into change invoices and receive the lien there. So again, here, if I were to say no, I would have to go into change invoices to receive the lien if I hadn't posted it. But I can receive the lien right when I'm entering the invoice as well. So now I can manually mark things as received by going into the subcontractor compliance management screen. So I can actually go through, and again, we can do multiple at the same time simply by clicking on it using the control key and receive the selected. Or if I wanted to print one, so instead of doing receive selected, I can click send to vendor, which one, and then when I click send, it will pop up and allow me to send this lien waiver to my vendor. I'm not actually hooked into a server, so okay. So it did finally get here. But so now it's going to tell me who I'm sending it to, what method. I don't have an email address in there for them, so I can click on this button, put in the email address where I want to send it to, go ahead and cancel, but it'll show you the actual document that it is sending. So I do have the option of emailing my lien waivers as well. So when that one comes back in, I would just simply come back to my compliance management screen and click that button. Now, if I do go in under my tasks and select invoices for payment, again, it will stop me from, based on my compliance settings in the AP settings, it will stop me from selecting or from selecting some if that's where I would have my warning set to. So I can come out here to do my final liens. And the only things that will show in here are those that have that checkbox, if they're commitment related. That checkbox on the commitment has to say that the final compliance has been approved. And that's a security setting that you can set up. And now because I selected final liens only, it's going to be a little slower. And when this pops up, the other thing you'll notice is that I'm not going to click final liens. On your payment selection screen, this shows when vendors are not in compliance, and there won't be a big blue C there when they are. I can click on the vendor and go to compliance management from here, and it's going to tell you what's not in compliance. I can go and view all of the things for that vendor. On a particular job for that vendor. So we can actually go through from here and go right to our compliance management. So basically, what happens is, the main gist of this is what's dictated by this button. So if we have that checked, it's going to apply to all vendors that work for a job that have the lien waivers box checked on the job. If we don't have that box checked, then even if vendors are the same vendor type, if I check the box on my compliance tab, if the job is set for lien waivers, this vendor would get it. If another subcontractor is not checked, they won't get a lien waiver. And again, each insurance is vendor by vendor, whether it's required for a commitment or not. So you can actually track compliance totally different from job to job, depending on how you wanted to do it. And that covers the compliance issues, how to set it up, how workflow goes, how things can be different from job to job and vendor to vendor, even if you don't check the default in the AP settings. So I guess if there are any questions.
Yes. Can you show us again how to create a non-compliance report?
A non-compliance. Oh, that's thank you for whoever asked that, because that's a reminder to me that if you want to get multiple compliance tabs on the same report, they have to be written in Crystal. They can't be written in the report designer. So if I wanted to do a combination of lien waivers, certifieds, insurances on the same report, that has to be done through Crystal. Now, if I wanted to print this out, I have an option to send it to Excel, or actually, this would be to print the lien waiver itself. So, or send to the vendor. But these compliance reports, I can do all, so it brings all of them up. I can do voided only, I can do received, and I can do outstanding. And that's the same option for all 4 of the tabs. Now, as far as if you wanted to print lien waivers after the fact, out here under reports, the reports are still in AP, even though most of the records or most of the fields are now contained in job cost. Okay. So the ones with CR after them are Crystal reports. The ones without CR are written in the Timberline Report Designer. And you do have compliance reports in here. Again, most all of these are written in Crystal reports. And I can run it by vendor, by job, subcontractor, snapshot, and basically what one of those looks like is I have to put in my vendor number. I don't have to put in a job number because I might want everything for just this vendor regardless of what job or commitment they're attached to. I have my choice of the statuses, so what they're compliant on, what's outstanding or expired, or I can do all. And now if I do a print preview here, this is going to give me a snapshot of A1 Electric and what's in compliance, what isn't in compliance.
Okay, what version of Timberline is this?
I am running currently version 12. There's really, it cleaned up a few, there's version 13 cleaned up a few unexpected features, but really nothing with this part of the program.
Okay. Next question is, does it only give you warnings when you are entering invoices?
That is controlled in the AP settings under compliance settings, and this is where we get our warnings when they show and when they don't, or if they do block the invoice for payment.
Okay, the next question is, does the insurance setup have minimal default amounts that will require data entry person to be prompted if the insurance is too low?
To my knowledge, no. What I guess probably could be set up as a My Assistant feature that on a weekly or daily basis, it would scan insurance amount fields for a certain threshold.
Okay, the next question is there a way to attach waivers to the invoices once the waiver is received?
Probably the only way you would be able to do that is if you scan in the waiver and through an invoice register, click on an invoice and do an attachment to it. Then I could do a file link to the waiver.
Okay. Right now, that's all the questions. If anyone has any other questions, please type them into the box. How does this work if you are using PO?
The compliance issues will still pop up over in PO when you go to enter an invoice. But as far as actually entering a PO, I don't believe that it does warn us. Let me just check that out. Right, I'm going to have to find that out. I don't believe it gives you a warning when you're entering the PO. I'm going to mark that down as a follow-up item.
Okay. Next question is, how does a non-compliance tab work for certified payroll? Do we have to mark them as received in Sage 300?
Yes. Yeah, that would be one of the manual entries that you would have to do. Oh, in Sage 100, did you say?
No, 300.
Oh, okay. I thought you said 100. I was like, well, I'm not sure about that one. But, yeah, we would have to come here to our subcontractor compliance manager, go to our certified tab, and just mark it as received.
Okay, next question is, does the lien tracking keep track of dollar amounts on the lower tier subs?
Well, you put in the threshold when you're setting up a job. If I go into job cost and bring up the job on my compliance tab, I can tell it how small an amount that I want. Like here, there's no minimum amount, so every job, or a lien waiver would be cut for every other vendor on this particular job. Doesn't matter how small the amount.
Okay, the next question is, what is a secondary vendor?
If a secondary vendor is somebody who you know is doing part of the work for your subcontractor, and you need for your owner or whoever you're doing the job for, that they require that you have documents from even your subs, if you will, that's when you would put in a secondary vendor.
Okay, very good. That's all the questions we have for today.
Okay.
So if you want to show that last slide of this presentation, please. We want to thank everyone again for attending today's Lunch and Learn session. Again, we will be emailing out the presentation to everyone. If you do have questions, please feel free to contact us at the information provided to you. Thank you all and have a good day.